You are now tuned in to The Spark and the Struggle. This is a space for multi passionate creators, soulful, artful entrepreneurs, and anyone who is navigating the highs and lows and the quiet in betweens of living a creative life. My name is Duchess Simone. I also go by the Color Duchess, and after 20 years of living, breathing, and building in this work, I've learned that the creative life is not always cute, but it is always calling. So, whether you are in the middle of a creative breakthrough or you are barely holding on and just hanging by a thread, honey, I want to tell you that you are not alone. Here we will talk about why we keep showing up and how to continue showing up even when it's the most challenging. Let's get into it. The reason why I'm even starting this production, I want to get this out here and say, I really wanted to do video for my YouTube, like visual video. Now, I have all these ideas, I have all these concepts, I have the drive, I have the passion. I have a conundrum. Amongst all these things, I also have plenty of conundrums and obstacles to work around. And instead of growing in resentment and frustration and taking it out on my loved ones, I've decided that maybe I should put my best foot forward and do what I can. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today. That definitely has to tie into today's topic of um, continuing to create even when it's hard. Okay. Knowing how to circumvent and adapt instead of throwing in the towel in one session to rely on the very next. Seeing what you can do, but also having discernment and knowing when it's time to pivot and when it's time to push. Okay. So, I first want to talk about my journey just as a creative in general. I have been doing art, creativity, and things of the like for, I want to say, 20 years, 20 plus years. I know that puts into question how old I am to a lot of people. And as far as I'm concerned, a lady never talks about her age. It's out there if you're looking for it. I don't hide, I'm not ashamed. It's just an interesting path. But I have been doing artsy things, creative things. I've been a creative entrepreneur for the past, it's 2025, so officially 10 years. I've been a creative business owner for 10 years. And I have learned so much on this journey. I started my YouTube journey um, in 2011ish, something around that time frame. And looking back on the time, the experience, um, just the overall journey, I've kind of always struggled with showing up and being seen and confidence and all the things. So before I even started posting my work online, I always had this awareness that it was just something that I wanted to do. And this isn't pertaining to creativity. I always had this awareness that creativity was just my second nature. I would always be the one at school to, write on my shoes. I went to a Catholic school, so we had uniforms, very little to no room to express oneself. I was always writing on my shoes, personalizing my accessories. On dress down day, I would always bring my accessorized jumpsuits or my jeans that I distressed whenever we had collective group days in terms of like t-shirt days for different gym activities and things like that. All my homegirls would bring me their t-shirts to kind of like rip up on the side and tie dye and different things like that. So I've always been known to have that creative spark and that creative edge that I would say was admired by my peers, but I don't know if I started gaining the respect until college, which is crazy because I've always been consistent with it. But when you're young, you're young. And even in college, I would say, throughout high school and even in college, when I did have the ability to express myself more, I don't necessarily think I had the confidence across the board to maintain that persona. I was very soft spoken. I'm not going to say I was shy. Inverted, not inverted, what's the word? Introverted. I was introverted, reserved, and observational. So I was not as forward with my voice as I was confident in my creativity, in a sense that I leaned on my creativity to be the icebreaker in the room. And that was fair to me. I felt like I always had to choose between having a creative life and a conventional life. And that is what prompted me to kind of put my work on a back burner and not necessarily think that I could make a sustainable living from being an artist. And I think that's something that a lot of people should definitely take into consideration when thinking about how they want to move forward in life. You know, when I first started 15 years ago, the things that we're able to do now, we weren't necessarily able to do with, social media. We had YouTube, we had MySpace, the Facebook, Snapchat, and Instagram did exist, but not in the capacity that it does today. And so, people are teaching, people are giving lectures, there's information out there, with the advent and the advancement of AI. You have all these tools that can help you push your own creativity and your own creative business forward. But there's also a lot to take into consideration in terms of it being perceived as something that can be sustainable. And that's something that I want everybody to definitely consider. Especially, I'm gonna say this and then we're gonna wrap up this topic. Especially because there's so many people saying, you can just plug this prompt into ChatGPT. I'm sorry, first backtrack. Download this template from Canva, plug into the prompt ChatGPT, throw it up there on one of these platforms, and then make some videos, and then the money starts rolling in. It's like it's not always that easy. It is that simple, but that isn't necessarily easy, especially when you are actually creating something tangible as opposed to creating like the content. I've always had this thing. The content itself is intangible. It's a video that exists on the internet of you doing things versus someone who is constructing, clothes, belts, ties, someone who is, making music and making content about their music, someone who's painting and making content about their painting versus people who are, selling concepts and ideas via social media marketing. It's two totally different things. And so um, just make sure that if you are wanting to venture into becoming a creative entrepreneur and not just a creative who's displaying their talents, make sure that if you're taking advice from people who are putting out this, you can make a living off your creativity and your sustainability, make sure that they are aligned with what it is that you do, or you can take bits and pieces from what it is that they are teaching and incorporate it into your medium specifically, because trying to copy and paste exactly what somebody else is doing and they're doing something totally different from you is not necessarily going to work. So just food for thought, points to ponder. On this journey, it's so important to recognize that creativity is not always going to be something that feels like an explosive, exciting spark. Okay, sometimes you will have to rely on your ritual, your practice, your regimen, your discipline. There are times when you will have to do it out of obligation, regardless if somebody has paid you for it or if you really just need to clear your head. It's not always something that is exciting. You're not always going to want to do it. Sometimes you will drag your feet. Sometimes you might feel resentful, but you owe that to your soul, assuming that you have one, no disrespect, but it is what it is. You owe that to your mental health, your emotional wellness, and you notice the difference if you don't have that outlet. You have to learn how to work through when you don't feel physically well. Obviously, I'm not saying, you know, ignore the fact that you might be, having something that requires medical attention. I'm not saying drag yourself through your creative process, even if you're like hemorrhaging from a recent wound. I'm not saying that, of course, but a slight stomach ache, little cramps, little headache, or whatever, depending on the situation. Definitely tend to yourself. Take your herbs, whatever kind of medication that you need to. Definitely drink your water, hydrate, elevate your feet, take care of yourself, but definitely learn how to navigate and balance all the things because you have to keep going. You have to keep going. You have to keep going. You have to continue creating even when you feel like nobody likes your stuff, even when you feel like nobody is sharing your stuff and nobody gives a damn. No disrespect, but they don't care. I'm not going to be one of those people to tell you you got to make them care because you can be successful as a creative entrepreneur with nobody giving a damn. Okay? I know that sounds, crazy and paradoxical, but it's possible, especially if it's something that you actually want to do and you're not relying on people to help you do it. Yes, this is a person driven business, but the way automation and AI is set up, baby, you have to outline what you define as successful. It's not to say that if you want to be the people's choice, do what the people want you to do. If you want to be successful, do what you want to do. It's definitely a difference. That's going to be all for this one. I am looking forward to getting better. I am proud of myself for starting this, getting this idea out of my head, and I'm going to have more of these audio series episodes for you guys very soon. And thank you so much for listening. If you are listening, if you're not a creative entrepreneur, send it to your friends, send it to your cousins, send it to your homegirl, send it to your colleagues because it's important for me to tell my story, but it's also important for me to connect with others to help them tell their stories. Okay? So, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you gained some insights. Peace and purple.